I pottered around doing this and that, still getting used to the new look of the place, and couldn't help but feel some pride as I did. It felt like all the recent renovations I'd done had been leading up to this. Quinn, the merchant, had put the idea in my head. I was going to build an establishment that would one day be famous for serving the most delicious bread you'll ever eat, where stories of the bread's secret recipe was only one of the many tales shared by weary but eager travellers. I may be the only person around here for now, but the population of Fool's Landing totalled 16. That included myself, Nelly, Fish, Two-Bone, Poof and Shudder, the cats Seville, Enin and Titan, and the 8 skeleton horses. I was burning through my stone bricks quickly and gave up waiting for the single furnace in the bunker to smelt more smooth stone, instead hauling down stacks of cobblestone to the kitchen. I still found myself feeling impatient and looked for a way to kill time. The great mouth of the chasm underneath my plateau swallowed the daylight and spat back out deep groans of zombies and the clacking of skeletons. Yet, the excitement of discovery beckoned me. I decided to bypass the proverbial front door of the chasm and crept through some of the natural tunnels on the surface of my plateau to find a place to start a mine shaft, in the hope that it would emerge within the cave itself. I took so long on the mine I need never have dirtied the farmhouse kitchen with the industrial smelting. As I pondered how the residue of smelting cobblestone would affect the food, I noticed that Nelly had the recipe for a baked potato. It was only then I realised that I'd misplaced my potato somewhere along the way. Frustratingly, I would have to take that off the tavern menu. I diverted a bit of time away from my current project to repair the smithy, which appeared to have burnt down. Even with an iron grate, wood and lava don't mix. I never really felt like I had the need to sleep. Only muscle aches and motivation stopped me from pressing forward. One night, whilst procrastinating, I refuged myself within the mine again, where I fortified it in preparation for extending it down into the earth at a later date. Aside from a route down into the chasm, the mine would be a good source of stone, which I currently had plenty of. My stores of wood, on the other hand, were less healthy, and I found the plains of the savannah to be a safer place at night than perching on top of a high wall. As I built, the undead skeleton horses plodded about the paddock, and I found it hard not to stare at them, or ignore their monstrous whinnying. I wasn't as resilient as Poof was in that regard. After spending a bit of time with them, I began to get to know them. There was Vomer and Conker, who always went around sniffing anything they could. Palatine, who never stopped eating, or should I say, trying to eat. Phalanx, oddly dexterous for a horse. I thought she was going to open the gate at one point, and she managed to find a way to wander out of the holding pen I had temporarily added. Tibia and Talus, the highest jumpers of the herd. I had to ride all of them to find that out. And finally, Hamate and Lunate, who always seemed to want to lend a helping hand. Sometimes it was difficult to tell them apart, if you weren't watching their behaviour. After a week of building, the bar in the tavern was ready to be stocked with its first batch of milk, and I once again found myself proudly surveying my work. The Hoof and Udder, Bakery and Tavern. Though somewhat downtrodden at the loss of my potato, the real draw of the Hoof and Udder would be its bread, despite the name. I had been meticulously farming the crops in between building, and whilst a nice stockpile was beginning to form in the farmhouse kitchen, I wanted to expand production. I knew I wasn't much of an engineer, but I wanted to learn. I was hoping to plant a bed of crops with some element of automation, to save time and energy, allowing me to cater for more potential patrons. My current planting bed was inspired by the fools at the Grumpy Village, where I thought to utilise the properties of water to act as a transport mechanism. Thinking back to what I'd seen in the Grumpy Village, I realised there were other properties of water that I could exploit. Whilst water would flatten any crops growing on tilled soil, it wouldn't affect the fertility of the dirt. I was excavating within the foundations of my budding crop tower when I saw that Guest had paid me a visit, confirmed by the vision of their name. The Enderman looked around at what I was working on, so I explained. I wasn't sure if Guest understood me when I talked, but my enthusiasm was unaffected, when something peculiar happened. My mind reeled into another Ender vision, except it was me who was communicating. It seemed that Guest was just as shocked as I was, because he zoomed away once we had both regained our senses. I didn't have a clue how I'd done it, but the vision of bread was one I was used to seeing, thanks to Guest himself. Perhaps that, coupled with my eagerness, allowed me to communicate on the Enderman's level. I checked in the farmhouse kitchen, where Guest frequented fish, but they weren't there. After a quick look around, I had almost given up, when I found them in the barn. Guest was deeply surveying the herd of skeleton horses. My unpracticed new ability to communicate back to Guest in the tongue of the Enderman may have given the impression I was more confident with Ender visions than I really was, because the vision of the horses Guest showed me was complicated. And no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't summon another vision to communicate back. Something about one part of the vision seemed somewhat familiar and eerie, but Guest's light touch soothed my fleeting worries. With that, I left Guest to investigate the skeletal steeds. The ghastly flying creatures, Abranis had called phantoms, were circling above me, but it seemed like something was warding them off. At first I thought it might have been the skeleton horses, which wouldn't have surprised me. But as I was finishing excavating the foundations, I realised it was the cats hissing that drove them away, just like creepers. Enin was appreciative to finally get the recognition for his duty. Building the crop tower to allow the water to freely flow across all the crops, whilst avoiding the staircase, and also having the staircase in arm's reach of the crops, with a second piece of plumbing needed to supply the crops with water, was more difficult than I thought. But after some, or rather a lot of tinkering, I figured it out. After almost another whole week of toiling without sleep, I finally decided to get some shut-eye. The cats gifted me with some chicken meat and another rabbit pelt, clearly very grateful to get some rest. Now I had two. I finished fitting a copper basin on the roof of the crop tower to catch the rain, and when it was full, I would release the water down spiralling mounds of dirt. That was my plan anyway, if the piston I had my eye on worked the way I thought it would, and Ellie gave me no reason to think it wouldn't. My plans were dashed, however, when I realised that I'd used the very last of my redstone I'd found in Copperwater Cave dungeon to make the forge. With my plans temporarily shattered, I resigned to fitting the exterior with lanterns. At least the non-functional crop tower would look slightly more impressive that way. But even that I couldn't immediately do, as my reserves of iron were expended, as was my copper. That and the considerable investment of stone and coal I'd sunk into the crop tower had left me with a few shortages. Luckily, the bountiful plateau had iron close to hand. I hope the crop tower pays off. I took a moment to breathe in my bunker, clearing the feeling of frustration that was welling inside me, when I was interrupted by a gruff shout. Outside my door was a band of raiders. I was stunned by their appearance and didn't answer at first when they shouted through the door to come out. When I had wished for visitors, this is not what I had meant. In my silence, they threatened two-boning the cats. I shouted back out the bars at them, asking what they wanted. The biggest of them said they had been robbed, and they're getting headed in this direction. I adamantly refuted the accusation that I was said perpetrator, but the hostile visitors weren't having it. They told me if I wanted them to leave, I'd have to give them back what I'd taken. Who could have robbed them? I asked. Who robbed you? Nice try, the little one said. You're lying. Another voice agreed. Yeah, I saw him ride away in one of those things. Do you think they're dangerous? They must be talking about the skeleton horses. The others stopped speaking when the gruff voice spoke. We will settle for 100 emeralds. Part of me was flattered that my home gave the impression of affluence, before considering that I could have been a defenceless villager in a hut and they'd still be extorting me. There probably was no robbery. The gruff voice raised again. If you don't come out right now, we'll pelt these animals with our crossbows until they're no more than pelts themselves. Okay, just stop. I keep my valuables in the basement. Hold on. You have 1 minute before we gut the yellow one. I grabbed the saddle from my chest as quietly as I could and went downstairs, followed by the zooming animals, who I greeted with a knowing look. The startled cries of the raiders could be heard above, but only faintly in the tunnel. I spared a glance at 2 of the skeleton horses, who were enjoying the waters of their trough, before mounting the closest horse to me. Together, we stepped atop the plateau to face the raiders, and I soon found that I was atop Talus, whose hooves sailed over the heads of the aggressors as he leapt in a whirlwind of clattering bones. It was a shame that the bandits didn't fancy a drink, as people of all shapes and sizes were welcome at the Hoof and Udder, so long as they don't cause trouble. Maybe people will say that it's guarded by a stampede of undead horses, but judging how much they intimidated even the raiders, perhaps I should try and keep a low profile for them. I thought about that as I helped Voma and Conker out of the water trough, both of whom had got stuck investigating it with their nose. Although they didn't seem to mind being almost completely submerged. I saddled up Talus for the trip ahead. The iron horse armour I'd also found in Copperwater Cave's dungeon didn't fit the skeleton horse, so I couldn't use that to hide his appearance. I'd just have to keep him out of sight of the villagers. I grabbed the enchanted book I'd fished up at the gravelly cliff to see if Gloria and old Carlton knew what it meant. After spending some time with Nellie in the kitchen, we had a stack of the Hoof and Udder's signature bread. Then it was time to say farewell to those who were staying at Fool's Landing, including the cats. Two-Bone, Talus and I would have to deal with the creepers and phantoms ourselves. And with that, we were off. Dusk approached with me as I neared the grumpy village. I'd already decided that it was a bad idea to arrive atop Talus, owing to his appearance. A hatred of monsters was about the only thing the towns in the savannah could agree on. So, I found a spot on Welcome Peak where the residents wouldn't blindly wander into him. Under cover of dark, I made my way into town. In the crisp morning, I hailed Abranas. There was no sales pitch, I simply wanted to give him some of the bread I'd hopefully one day sell at the Hoof and Udder. No one knew about my bakery and tavern, so I was trying to spread the word, but he refused to accept it, telling me that they had all the food they needed, gesturing at the bales of hay, which looked a little damp and forgotten about. Knowing Abranas would only turn more stubborn at the slightest provocation or annoyance, I tried my best to hide my disappointment. Borg might be more reasonable than Abranas, I thought, but I was determined, and went back to talk to the old smith. He was in the smithy lecturing Fergus, although it was Fergus who I heard first. Abranas, you told me the same thing yesterday. 50 years old and you forge an iron axe like you're still figuring it out. What would grandfather say?
I can't concentrate with you breathing down my neck. I barely got any sleep with that hideous noise from the mountain. You might have heard it too, if anything but your own snores woke you.
I might have some idea what Fergus was talking about.
You're whinging and you're crying, making excuses like you always have. You know what? Why don't you just...
Brannis, about that bread. Probably not the best idea I'd ever had to interrupt, because Brannis was almost as fiery as his forge at that moment.
We don't want your charity. And now you're turning down free food. Give it here.
I decided to overlook that Fergus had accepted my bread out of spite and handed over a loaf. I thought Brannis was about to wrestle the bread off Fergus.
We are perfectly able of making our own food. Give that back.
It took a moment for Fergus to respond with his mouth full.
We haven't had a farmer, let alone a cook, living here for almost a decade. Those old composters are just degrading out there in the rain. Now give me another. I've been worked to the bone and I'm hungry.
Two-Bone growled at Fergus as he greedily extended his hand. I gave him 2 and told Brannis bluntly that he can pay for it if he likes, but I'd much prefer if he'd just tell people where it came from. Brannis accepted, and I dished out the remainder of the Grumpy Village's gift from my stockpile as the two of them argued. I'm sure they'll share it out fairly. Apart from advertising my fledgling enterprise, I was also visiting the villages of the savannah to offer my services as a builder. Brannis said I had a knack for it, and I was eager to practice. The villages in the area were barely able to maintain their own structures, let alone erect more. Helping them was no skin off my nose. I was thinking about what I could build next as I gathered wood, but stopped when I saw 2 Endermen on the outskirts of town. There was an uneasy aura emanating from the standoff. Were they arguing? I tried to keep out of sight. Two-Bone was agitated and couldn't help himself. The Endermen turned towards his bark. The closest one acted first and moved towards me. In a momentary flash, I recognised Guest, who stood between me and the other Enderman. The aura the Enderman were emitting had turned from uneasiness to an awful feeling of fear and despair. It looked like Guest was avoiding facing the other, but perhaps was tricked into locking gazes. The aura of intense emotions crescendoed in a moment that seemed to last an age. With one final push from Guest, the farthest Enderman slinked away, but in his exhaustion, Guest was unable to explain what had happened, although he may not have had time anyway, because I was chased away by a pair of phantoms that approached from the direction the other Enderman had left. I was missing the cats. Under the circumstances, I turned in for the night. Fergus had said he hadn't slept well again and was rivaling his older brother's grumpiness. Whatever kindness he had shown me before was all but gone, including any appetite he had for my bread. Brannis always got good sleep and was receptive when I talked to him about wanting to do further construction projects here. His willingness struck me as odd. If you'll let me build you things for free, what's wrong with accepting my bread?
It's not the same. You're a builder. And don't think I'll forget any help you offer.
I tried to tell him I wanted to be a baker, but he was off on one of his rants.
We're warriors, and we're descended from warriors. We don't build. Now don't get me wrong, we have great respect for your craft. We just don't do it. Can't. With food, we may not like the work, but we're
I often lost track of what Brannis was saying when he went off on a rant. I suppose when someone doesn't listen to you, you're just less likely to want to listen to them. But whilst I wasn't listening, my wandering mind and eyes had given me an idea.
For measly crops, they've got another thing coming.
Brannis, I interrupted, do you think Clara would like it if I built stairs to her hut? The stairwell from the upper level of the Grumpy Village to the ground was one of my larger projects to date, just in terms of scale. I wanted to try and weave the path of the stairs through the waters on the base of Welcome Peak without disturbing them too much. Over the days I was a guest here, Brannis and I spent some lovely mornings together, surveying the progress of the stairwell and discussing the future of the village. Abranus was eagerly awaiting the return of their younger brother, Georgius.
When he does return,
Abranus said,
the village will need another grindstone, now that Fergus is actually pulling his weight. Too bad he's light and lanky.
Abranus laughed at his own joke. Fergus was still beefier than me, but anyone looked small when compared to Abranus. I had previously gathered a modest stockpile of acacia wood here, but used it very quickly, so was spending a good amount of time on the plains of the savannah collecting more. I took it upon myself to harvest the crops and also brought in the composters. Fergus was right, they were just lying outside deteriorating. As I was removing the second one, I noticed an opening in the side of Welcome Peak. The cave looked even bigger than the chasm underneath my home. Fergus was bathing when Quinn arrived. At night, the merchant would drink an invisibility potion to keep himself safe, but on this occasion had used it to surprise Fergus as he washed.
For crying out loud, can I just get 5 minutes alone?
Quinn was unperturbed.
No need to be sad, Fergus. I was hardly going to wake Abranus up. Just seeing if you're interested in parting with any of your hard-earned emeralds. Well, if you're selling a loaded crossbow...
I don't have anything of value on me, I'm afraid, Quinn. I stopped myself from saying his name. I was uniquely privileged to know it. Fergus was too busy rolling his eyes to notice.
And neither do we, thanks to you.
Fergus had conveniently forgotten about our own trading, clearly still feeling sour that Abranus had given away their only diamond to me.
Isn't that a shame?
I was interrupted as I began to tell Quinn that I did have some of the finest bread he'll ever eat, when Talus's monstrous brain filled the still night.
If that thing keeps me up again, I'll find it and shut it up myself. Someone better do it, or there'll be trouble.
Fergus didn't get any sleep that night in the end. Neither did the rest of us, because we stayed up, talking. Quinn's demeanour was more relaxed once Fergus had set off, late for the day's work, now regretting his decision to skip bed, and the merchant's tongue was ever so slightly less tough.
You've been busy building?
That's right, I said. It's dangerous trying to traverse the mountain. I'm hoping this might help. And Abranus wants to expand his workshop for when Georgius returns.
Not here. I must have just missed you at your home before you left.
It's fortunate you did. I went on to explain in detail what had happened when the raiders extorted me under the guise that I needed to return their stolen property.
So that's where they went. Considering how careless they are at watching their own things, those pillagers aren't half bad at tracking.
I paused at what Quinn had just said. Wait, they were robbed? I looked at Quinn in the eye. By you? And you rode away on a llama, not a skeleton horse.
I reckon that pillager could have convinced himself that's what he saw. I suppose you can convince yourself of all sort of things, including thinking that it's all fine to keep the reanimated rejections from the candlemaker wandering round your garden.
I struggled to think of a way to respond. Quinn had somehow managed to steal from the raiders. But he was right. Anyone from the Grumpy Village, Lushville or Old Carlton that found out I was lodging the skeleton herd would surely be disgusted by me. Just imagine what they might think if they knew about Guest. I wonder what even Quinn might think of that. I really should get a move on, pal. As usual, I'd probably come up with something clever to say later on, far after the moment had passed. Damn, I should have told him about the hoof and udder. Whilst I was staying at the Grumpy Village, I tried to make the most of Abranus' tutelage in the art of battle, though he often repeated that I was
just a builder.
He had no problem instructing me in the ways of combat, and it often fell to me to fight off the monsters that invaded overnight. So much for the villagers here being warriors.
Good practice for you,
he said. Abranus was excited at the power of my bow and told me that a well-placed sword strike to a creeper, after it's been thwacked with a propelled arrow, should be enough to defeat it. He taught me that the trick with skeletons is to get in close quickly. Zombies can be safely attacked from a higher vantage point, and the trick to fighting phantoms is to lure and trap them underneath things so they can't fly away. I employed these strategies as I ventured out up the mountain to check on Talos. The rock sheltered the skeleton horse against the worst of the wind and rain, but I felt bad that I'd left him tethered to a post, still donned in the heavy saddle. No wonder the animal had been shrieking at night. I told him to try and relax if he can, and turn the small hollow into a makeshift stable before I ran out of oak wood and said my farewells, promising him I'd come back soon. The nights were a bit quieter after that. I needed even more acacia wood to extend the smithy, and coal to smelt smooth stone in the fashion of their existing forge, which Abranus was kind enough to explain how to do, apparently very proud of himself that he was instructing a builder on building as well as fighting. And in turn, he was proud of me that I had chosen to venture into Welcome Peak to collect the coal we needed, practicing some of his techniques as I did, albeit with the entrance still in view. I was thinking about the story that Quinn had told us the other night as I excavated the basement for the smithy. It was Fergus that had brought it up, moaning that his village had fallen from such wealth and influence. But even though Fergus was 15 in the village when it had happened, Quinn seemed to know more about it than he did, and was the better storyteller. So Fergus begrudgingly let the merchant tell me.
It was about 35 years ago. An aristocrat woman walked into town. She had been fleeing pillagers that had attacked her distant home. All she carried with her was a locked chest that had all her remaining possessions in the world. Inside, she said, was a jewel so old and rare she wouldn't even let others lay eyes upon it. She insisted that the chest be kept under lock and key in their most secure place, which was a vault built with iron and stone.
Fergus had said the vault was gone now, just another thing that had been destroyed and lost.
The night she arrived, the aristocratic woman was so happy to be somewhere safe, she stayed up till the early hours of the morning, drinking with the villagers and charming whoever she talked to.
Getting my father drunk and sleepy, you mean?
Fergus had interjected.
Well, when the villagers woke late the next morning, she had disappeared, along with her locked chest and everything else in the vault, including the prized possession of your village, Fergus, the old king's sword, a priceless ancient treasure, one of the few things that survived the downfall of the ancient empire.
The memories had come back to Fergus.
At the time, no one knew how she'd done it. The door had been opened from the inside. I think that jewel the witch made her store away was a teleporting stone.
But Quinn had scoffed at the idea of a magical gem and taunted Fergus.
What do you know about that kind of magic? You don't know how she got away with it? You couldn't even remember the story?
Fergus was easy to wind up, and Quinn couldn't help himself. Abranus dragged me into the smithy basement the morning after I'd finished it to show me what he'd made in his new workshop. There, another golem stood, ready to haul coal, iron and stone at the whim of the brothers. Fergus was there too, donned in apprentice blacksmith attire, and Abranus was laughing at how poorly the old garb fit him.
That thing is a wee bit stinky.
Abranus was laughing as he talked.
At least I have the honour of wearing them and you don't. If you do somehow manage to stop being lazy, you might end up getting the oldest and smelliest of the clan's blacksmith lords.
Fergus had convinced me to sell him a lot of coal. I didn't know it was earning him prestige. Abranus told me that's just how it works with whatever job a villager might have. In truth, I was only selling the coal to afford Abranus' iron axes. For the first time since I'd arrived, Clara appeared to say hello. Where had she been? She was appreciative for the stairs and the smithy, but not as appreciative as Abranus, who firmly grasped me in gratitude. He smiled.
I must admit, I wasn't expecting your bread to taste as good as it did. We'll see you soon, laddie.
I walked up the stairs I'd built into the side of the mountain, towards Taris's rocky stable, ready for the next leg of my adventure. As I ascended the slopes, I heard a commotion below in the square. It looked like Georgius had returned from the never-ending forest, And unlike Fergus's attempt, he had actually found people willing to move into the area. As glad as Brannis would have been to have his younger brother home, he was never really on board with inviting other people to live in his village. I can only imagine the type of welcome he'd give them. Arrow after arrow flew past Talus as he galloped across the dark plains. He outran the phantoms that followed us from the grumpy village. By the time I'd said goodbye to him, the rising sun was overshadowed by the rain. It was commonplace to drizzle in Lushville. Luckily for Talus, the hollow I'd carved out for him on Mount Portley was far enough away from the worst of the wet prevailing winds to stop his makeshift cave from flooding. The surrounding villages were sparsely populated, and despite its size, Lushville was no exception. Things seemed even quieter than the last time I was here. It was Penny, the toolsmith, who I ran into first. Penny was young, pretty, and always kind. "Oh, I'm so sorry, Fa. I don't think we can buy any of your produce today. It happened again." Penny was on the verge of tears. "Those pillagers returned, and they took Bob and Lad. I haven't seen them for over 2 months. I don't think they're coming back." As well-meaning as they were, my condolences did little to cheer her up, so I tried to think practically. "Are you sure you're safe here, Penny?" "Oh, I'm not here alone. Some newcomers have moved in. They got lost looking for old Colton." After talking to Penny for a bit about the struggle of maintaining everything in town almost by herself, I helped her to store away the unused cauldrons, brewing stand and grindstone, the last of which caught my eye as something of Brannis from the grumpy village might be able to make better use of. Nellie gave me a shove in the back. It wasn't until that night that I ran into one of the newcomers, who was enjoying the cool night air, drizzle and all. I noticed the nearby hut's door was open, but upon investigating was ambushed by a creeper. The ensuing blast ripped off the front of the structure, almost taking my arm with it.
Crikey, that's a bloody nuisance.
Yes, it was a bit careless. Slightly embarrassed, I mimicked his relaxed demeanour whilst trying to hide my injuries, but I don't think the man could be bothered by anything, and barely looked round as I repaired the damage I'd caused.
My ma named me Theodore, but you can call me Teddy. I came here with Gibble. Unfortunately, he's not the sharpest tool in the shed, and he fell down the hole. Do you think you could help him? I'm just a bit worried that he's getting scared."
That was an understatement. Teddy's huge friend Gibble was frantic as he avoided the currents of the pool that were flowing deeper into the ravine, and he didn't calm down until after he had passed out in the bed I made for him, in a room carved into the rock. Teddy did say he might be exhausted. He'd spent the whole night before treading water. Earlier, as Teddy had donned his librarian robes, he explained how they were both already tired after their long journey here.
There aren't too many villages around with an actual library, and to tell you the truth, the last couple of places we've stayed haven't treated us too kindly. So, we've been on the move, until we came across one of those flies from Old Carlton. Food, shelter, jobs. Come to Old Carlton, we are the free. But Gibble wandered off, and we ended up here.
Gibble had less to say than his travelling companion, but thankfully didn't take his time to navigate the winding staircase of wood and stone I had built, as he was desperate to reach the open air. Gibble was appreciative and keen to make up for the lost time by getting straight to work. It was apparent he had no idea what he was doing, so I helped him, and together we farmed the patch of wheat and melons overlooking the ravine he'd just escaped from. I was rubbing my hands clean of dirt when Penny beckoned me over. She wanted me to build them a safe shelter, or rather, to dig them one, right in the heart of town. I've been thinking about what you said. Even with my new friends, I don't think we are safe. The librarian is so small, I don't think the monsters notice him. And the big one is even more frightening than I am. Monster sightings were very frequent in the savannah, and Lushville was sitting on top of one of the ravines that they seemed to pour out from. One more bad night, and Lushville could be no more. Gibble didn't need any convincing to hide in the shelter, but Teddy was happy to stay out under the stars, until I made him come inside. I had forgotten that I'd told Two-Bone to stay out of the way of the lava, and he had dutifully waited for me the whole day as I was digging. The few townsfolk of Lushville were safe in their shelter when I left to gather acacia on the plains between here and Copperwater Cave, and just as well, because that night I saw more monsters than I ever had done before. My sword broke, my axe broke, then I was fending off a horde of zombies with just my pickaxe, longing for one of Abranis's iron swords. But it was more than just monsters that Lushville had to worry about. The ravine where Gibble had fallen was a death trap. I had walled off a lava stream within, but from above it now looked more like a glowing target to fall into. One of the things I needed to do was make the ominous pit idiot-proof. My project to make Lushville safe seemed to reveal more problems than it solved. I erected numerous crude beacons in the area to ward off the monsters that refused to let me work in peace. I was out so long, I relied on eating through considerable amounts of the town's melons, returning some bread and wheat as I did. I was feeling guilty for taking so much of their food, so in return I planted a carrot patch outside the huts I had occupied. Whenever I checked in with Penny, Teddy and Gibble, they seemed to be having the time of their lives. In the complete safety of the hole, with a ban on working, relaxing was the best thing for it, and all three Lushvillians were making the most of the opportunity, laughter often echoing out from the trapdoor in the square. Even after my trip to Copperwater Cave, I spent a lot more time on the plains collecting wood, a task I was becoming all too familiar with after my recent time in the Grumpy Village. I might have hurried myself along, but with the villagers all enjoying their holiday at home, I allowed myself a few brief detours. I sheared some sheep to provide the shelter with beds, as well as finding myself collecting a handful of eggs. I ran across a herd of wild horses, who didn't run as I strolled between them, and I helped a donkey to avoid falling into a cave. In the past, I tried to ride a donkey I'd encountered, but perhaps this time my alternative intentions was the charm I needed. The donkey took a liking to me and allowed me to ride him without bucking. I put Stumble in the big paddock within town, where the golem guarded the village's hay, although I think Stumble had unintentionally taught the golem to climb over the hay to get in and out. I thought it was about time to end the curfew and went to spend the last night in the shelter with my new friends. The merry conversation flowed seamlessly, like it had done since we all started feeling a little safer, and Gibble enjoyed listening. I'd had to change the entrance to the shelter, as Gibble couldn't work out how to use the ladder and trapdoor. As the sun began to set, our joy caught in our throats as we heard a group of footsteps on the decking above our heads. The muffled talking was hard to distinguish, until Lud's thick voice broke through the rabble. "Where's Penny? Penny? Penny?" Penny started. "We're down here!" We emerged. The arriving group were looking around, perplexed at the odd, deserted state of the village. Bob was in the group too, and investigated the shelter.
What's this then, Penny? A big hole? Oh, that's just brilliant. How did you escape?
Ludd explained.
Well, those pillagers were holding us up near where Aunt Sally and Uncle Rufus's ranch is. One night, a mysterious figure pinched something of theirs, and half 'em run off chasing him. In the commotion, we needn't fight. We just walked away. Didn't need our shoes. Anyway, seems like these Dunmoor Crag pillagers all but completely despoiled that whole area. So, the family came back with us.
The family were all hugging and embracing Penny, who was happier than I'd ever seen her, and they were also introducing themselves to Teddy and Gibble. Gibble took a deep breath and mustered up a few words, thanking everyone for letting them stay in Old Carlton. The chatter paused and a mild tension filled the air, before Teddy offered a faint apology for the mistake, like he was used to making apologies on Gibble's behalf. But Gibble seemed to have missed the point, and Teddy had to shut him up as he started mumbling, confused as he thought that Penny liked having guests. The town felt alive again. The hum of busy farmers filled the morning, and I told Ludd about what I'd built whilst he was away. He was grateful and said that
this will help the family feel right at home.
He was also happy to let go of their unused grindstone, and when I told him I intended to give it to a Brannis in the grumpy village, he asked me to try and persuade the old smith to let them purchase some of his weaponry, should they be attacked again. I didn't have enough time to meet everyone properly, but had learned enough to know that the family were used to farming cattle. Teddy was scratching the surface of Lushville's modest library, which housed many dusty tomes with titles relating to agriculture and animal husbandry. With his assurance that they had the means to expand their farm, I persuaded a few sheep to move in too. The golems the family had brought with them, combined with my own measures, would hopefully keep the place safer, a slightly stronger footing against the threat of monsters and raiders. But, for me, the best part of the family's arrival was their reception to my gift of bread from the hoof and udder. They simply loved it and wanted more. Well, they were always welcome to visit. I collected my valuables from the hut I had established as a pseudo workshop, including a few emeralds I'd made selling some of Lushville's own produce back to them. They had insisted, and I had tried to return their kindness by purchasing stone tools from Penny that I didn't really need, as well as now depositing a few surprise stacks of carrots in one of their store huts on my way off. The village had 2 store huts side by side, and I had been depositing things and sorting since I'd arrived. Nellie shoved me in the back once more, and I picked up the grindstone. As I turned to leave, Nellie's shoving became harder. She wasn't satisfied. She pushed me back to the chest, and I tried to understand what she was telling me. She wanted me to take the village's leather. We're not thieves, remember? Nellie did remember that I had promised her to return the favour when she'd previously helped me save face from a Brannis by guiding me to make an anvil in the grumpy village. Now she was cashing in that favour, and I was obliged to honour my promise. But I couldn't get away fast enough once I'd pocketed the leather. It felt like all eyes in the village were on me, even though they were asleep. As I looked back, a pang of realisation hit me at just how ugly the beacons were. On this occasion, I had strongly favoured function over form, but considering the state Lushville was in when I had arrived, perhaps that was the sensible decision. I was soon to move on to Old Carlton. It was my plan to go straight there after Lushville, but when I briefly stopped to extend Talus's cave a little, I became carried away. When I started the wooden bridge across the large crag on Mount Portley to get to the grove of oak trees on the other side, I didn't know how long my stationary detour would be. Even when I had finished digging out the second level of the mountain hall, and the third, then redug them because I changed my mind about the length, I still told myself that I wouldn't be here long. Wherever I planted my temporary roots, I became attached. Whether that was Copperwater Cave, Gravelly Cliff, the villages, or of course my home, Falls Landing. I'd never stayed anywhere quite like Mount Portley though. Maybe I was inviting the attention of monsters by keeping the entrance as just a fence. But in my head, I was only fancifying Talus's quarters, at least to start with. There seemed to be far more Endermen around, but not guessed. I'd not seen them since the standoff with that other one. I knew the Endermen were feeling inquisitive when I sensed the echoes of their visions. None were as potent as guests. In fact, it was rare for me to receive visions from any Enderman other than guest. But the deeper I dug, the more potent they were becoming. I almost didn't trust my eyes when the roof of gravel caved in to reveal the sunlight. But there was Old Carlton, a shortcut through the whole mountain I had not intended to make. It was hard to dwell on any of the Endermen visions, because these ones seemed to ebb away quickly, like awakening from a dream where the harder you try to remember, the quicker the memory fades. I couldn't decipher the cryptic messages and didn't know if they were meant in the spirit of goodwill or provocation, or if they were intended for me at all. And, whether it was intentional or not, their activity was certainly riling up the monsters as well.
Your stuff and we'll leave it in the duff, 'cause we never turn away a fight. They say we're the cursed bit amongst the villagers, for we are the Dunmoor Crag Pillagers. Our crossbows fire through the blizzard and the mire, and for the winner are the spoils. Yes, we are the curse stealing from the villagers, the big strong Dunmoor Crag Pillagers.
My senses were returning to normal outside in the open air. A huge tree had grown next to the makeshift bridge across the crag. While surveying it, I almost overlooked the pillager standing beneath the leaves. He had noticed me, but his crossbow took too long to reload, and I managed to close the gap. Fortunately, the other pillagers were too preoccupied to hear the scuffle, their captain's eyes fixed upon Lushville, and his men bandying loudly.
If we waited much longer for the others to get back, we'd never catch them.
I sneaked closer, to better eavesdrop on them.
I reckon we'd take their hats as well as their shoes this time. Teach them a lesson. You see 'em, boss?
Yeah, they scurried back all right. The village looks different to the last time we were here, though.
This must be the group of pillagers that kidnapped Bob and Lud. As I edged across the slope, I was spotted. Not by one of the pillagers. A skeleton, shielded in the shadows of Mount Portley, fired at me, and I fumbled for my shield. The clumsy monster fell into the crag as it marched forward. There was no hiding now. Arrows, monsters, man and wolf rained into the crag's crevice, but luckily Two-Bone zoomed back up to me.
You're gonna pay for dropping those on our head.
I don't think so. You're going to be the ones who pay for coming back here. If you want to get to Lushville, you're going to have to go through me. The pillagers laughed. I suppose I didn't sound too intimidating. It was only then I'd noticed the only armour that hadn't deteriorated was my enchanted helmet, from the skeleton horseman that attacked me at Fool's Landing.
All right then, lads. Get through him.
I would have stayed on my safe perch until my shield gave way, but Two-Bone had jumped down again and was in danger, so I threw caution to the wind and dived in after him. The close battle was decided when I chose to eat a carrot in the face of a loaded crossbow. I awoke in Lushville. I'd forgotten the sensation of falling after I perished. It made my head spin, a different type of disorientation than I'd been feeling inside Mount Portley. The whole time I'd stayed in the mountain, I hadn't slept at all, so here I was. The day's work was over for the Lushvillians, but I was in no mood to exchange pleasantries, nice as I'm sure they'd be. As I slipped away, I overheard Teddy chivying on Gibble.
Come on, mate. You know Uncle Rufus ain't gonna be happy with you if you're late again.
But Gibble was stuck. Even from far away, Lud's booming voice was easy to hear.
I just don't understand how he could have even managed to lose all that weight.
My belongings were still where I was slain, and I breathed a sigh of relief that the last surviving pillager hadn't taken anything. I suspect Two-Bone had chased him away. At least he won't be looking for me, and I'd stopped the attack on Lushville. Before I headed back into the eerie halls of the mountain, I noticed a banner on the ground. Its colours were that of the Dunmoor Crag Pillagers. I hung the banner of the Pillagers up and inspected it. More impressive than my own plain white banners, but not to my taste. The face on the banner contorted in front of me. I tried to shake off the uninvited vision that had caught me off guard, and told myself to just press forward with my designs. I'd used the flowers I'd picked from the grassland, east beyond the grove, both for dyes and for decoration. When collecting clay for plant pots, Two-Bone had almost drowned. I had all but told myself that the stable was the last addition to the mountain halls for now, and just needed a few more resources to finish it off. With my recent run of bad luck in the field, I thought it would be sensible to venture out in daylight, and so finally tethered myself to the mountain bed by sleeping there. I had never had nightmares more vivid than that night. It was only once I had awoken that I realised the dreams were more endervisions, and they didn't stop once I'd woken up. Like aftershocks, my reality distorted, and I couldn't help but try to pat away the hallucinated flames. No, they were real flames. I had fallen again. The second hit to my reserves of magical energy wasn't as harsh as the first, but that didn't take the sting out of it. I had been careless, which I partly remedied by storing away the magic helmet, lest I lose that too. Determined to carry on, I added some final touches here and there, including strengthening the bridge across the crag where I'd been shot, before retiring the job of expanding my mountain hall for another day. At first, I thought the faint rustling was the echoes of another vision. I was finding it was easy to second-guess yourself within Mount Portley. Then, a voice cut through the still air.
There once was a great hall built within Mount Portley, but this isn't it. Someone has defiled this holy place by digging into it.
Despite being unarmed, Phineas was making me feel very vulnerable without any armour. But no, the mountain was not his. Whatever was here isn't here now, but we are. You can't just barge in.
We? I suppose you'd be referring to that skeleton horse down those stairs.
Now I had been caught red-handed.
What will the people of Old Carlton think when they find out about your little pet?
Talus might look different, but he isn't dangerous.
No, Talus seems very placid. I've never seen one up close before. Few have. I want you to bring more monsters here, so I may study them.
That doesn't sound very safe.
If you don't do as I ask, it won't just be the skeleton horse that is revealed. It will be my duty to have to tell Gloria that you're in fact establishing a forward base for the Dunmoor Crag Pillagers.
I got that from a defeated pillager.
Or, now that I think about it, maybe you're spying on Old Carlton for Lushville. I don't see any dirt covering the west entrance to your little warren.
You know that's a lie.
Shush! I will tell you which monsters to get and how to build their cages. You clearly don't know a thing about them.
I felt like there was nothing more I could say. Before, I had voluntarily helped Phineas to catch a drown for his studies. Now, if I didn't help, Phineas would tell the people of Old Carlton I had a skeleton horse, and I'd become a pariah. Then, I'd never be able to sell my bread there. So, that's how I agreed to assist Phineas in turning Mount Portley into his very own monster laboratory. He could come here whenever he liked, and would expect my full cooperation. At least I might learn something from it. Phineas, do you know anything about Endermen? I chose my words carefully. I've been having some bad dreams. It seemed Phineas was choosing his words carefully too.
This is not just a holy place for us. But perhaps holy isn't quite the correct word to describe the significance of this place.
He left, and I pondered the sticky situation I'd found myself stuck in.
I'm sorry. Any iron we do have I need for the damned golem. Every time I see the thing it's had another dink.
Well, we'll just have to think of a way to get more.
Another quiet day with no fresh faces. How long has it been since the last passerby took one of your important letters with them, eh, Gloria?
I've quite lost count now. What with all these strange dreams, we're struggling to sleep. The days have been rolling into one. And what's your reason for staying up late? Clearly not because you're busy helping out around here. You can't very well have nightmares if you're not asleep, can you, Breen? Or is that why you talk to yourself throughout the night? Or did you find another monster to hide in your basement? Don't forget the water this time if the thing needs it to breathe. I think you'll find if the builder had followed my designs. Speak of the devil, and where have you come from for? Oh, don't tell me. You've just been visiting your friends in Lashville. Phineas had never given me the designs for his laboratory extension in town, and he knew exactly where I'd just come from. I was half tempted to tell everyone about the halls I dug into Mount Portley, just to drop him in it too. Yes, I have come from Lashville. I wanted to tell Gloria that 2 gentlemen arrived there. They were looking to join you here, but got lost. What were you doing wasting your time over there again? Well, it seems that some of my letters met with their intended recipients after all, Phineas. Fall, perhaps you could come and tell me more tomorrow. I fear it's getting dark, and we should all go inside. Everyone listened to Gloria, but I knew the risks and was more interested in the donkey that was prancing about the town square like he owned it. After trying and failing to ride him, I took him to the animal pen, but accidentally released one of the pigs as I did. When faced with 3 zombies, the pig ran off and I had to leave her, only to then have her appear at my side as I was eating one of my last carrots. They seemed to be the pig's favourite. As I went to sleep in the boathouse, I found another one of those strange orbs just lying on the ground. What were they, and where did they come from? That night, I was also subject to bad dreams. So then, what's all this about travellers in Lashville? The men that arrived there found a pamphlet advertising Old Carlton as a place to live. There was a motto on it. We are the free, the ancient words of the town, but still as true as they ever were. Did they say where they picked it up? No, they hadn't said. It then occurred to me that Gloria didn't seem surprised that one of her letters had ended up in a stranger's hand. I went on to explain a bit more about Teddy and Gibble and the troubles that had befallen Lashville until Bob and Lud returned. When Gloria was satisfied, I addressed the reasons I'd made my own journey here. I found a book. I think you might be able to make better sense of it than I can. I handed the book I'd fished up from the gravelly cliff to Gloria. Her eyes widened as she delicately turned over the first few brittle pages, avoiding touching the small barnacles that still clung to its cover. The book was written in an old dialect, with some of the words I'd never even heard of. There were also a number of runes that glistened on the pages, but were a complete mystery to me. If you'll be staying with us, perhaps I could employ your building services. Once upon a time, Old Carlton was home to the most prestigious library in all the land. Don't think I'm asking for a miracle, but it is somewhat of an embarrassment to the town if Lashville are more scholarly than we are. I was happy to help, and grateful that Gloria would take a look at the enchanted book. And if you could, this time would you build using stone? If you need, you can start a mine on the edge of town, by the ravine. I certainly did not need to dig out any more stone. Then I got to the second reason I'd come, and told Gloria about the hoof and udder, along with giving her a gift of its product. Despite how long ago I'd made it, Nellie's recipe for bread seemed to be resistant to the ravages of time. Gloria, Dana and Breen all reeled at its fabulous taste. Moreover, whilst I was here, Gloria said I was free to eat from their modest produce. There wasn't any bread left for Phineas, but that wasn't why he was angry. I'd overheard the slight to his intelligence as I walked into town, and now he was taking that out on me. The death of the drowned I'd left him was apparently a sore subject, which might have been why he hadn't mentioned it until now. It's time that you replace the drowned you lost. I think a very large pool will be needed, dug within the mountain halls of course, and the water must be taken from the wishing well. Sorry, it's a little bit of a walk to and fro, but I'm sure you'll manage. That sounds doable, but hauling the water from the well will take far longer than it's worth. I should be able to expand the water trough in the stable though. What do you think of a large bowl-shaped... Water must be from the well. Also, what was that creature's name? Talus? I'll be having him too. Far more useful in my hands, I'm sure you'll agree. I'd had enough of Phineas's spite. I'm not building it like that, and you can't have Talus. If you refuse, then your secret will be revealed. Do it then. Tell them. But if you do, who else is going to gather your monster specimens? He'd made an empty threat, and I called his bluff. Fine. Why don't you start off with something easy and dig a pit for a zombie? Even you can't mess that up. And you can keep your dead horse. I'll go do that now, but I'll have some redstone first. Oh, and you better stay here whilst I'm working. Don't want you to get caught by a stray zombie. I'd needed the redstone for my crop tower, and the small amount he gave me would be enough. When I returned to Mount Portley, I took down the banner of the Dunmoor Crag Pillagers. It was silly to put it up in the first place, but at some point I thought I should hang something up. Other banners or perhaps some paintings. For the time being though, the blank walls were a blessing. Anything I let myself get lost in for a moment would trigger an uninvited endervision. When I was concealing the now taller ceilings under mounds of dirt, I had a brief reprieve from the mental battle of concentrating my whole attention on work. But as I dug through the mountain and fell into a calm rhythm of swinging my pickaxe, my mind wandered and the visions plagued me. They were making it hard to think, and I made the mistake of digging out a corridor I should have known was going to breach outside. I had run out of dirt to cover the structures and was running out of food. I needed to visit Lushville. When I got there it was dark, so I helped myself to some of the carrots from the bed I had planted, as well as stacks of dirt from my own stores there. A shame I didn't get to say hi to the villagers, because I would have welcomed a kind word or two. Back in the mountain, I burned through many picks, and with each one that broke, I had to traipse through the long halls to craft another. This time, trying and failing to clear my mind, to be at one with the moment. But then, another rendered daydream hit me. Slowly, I weaved the corridor through the rock, so the pit room sat directly beneath the main hall. Now, all I needed was a zombie. Like my plateau, the mountain was rich in minerals. The iron I had gathered I made into almost a complete set of armour. Though it would surely come in handy later, I had overestimated the problem ahead. The hunt for the zombie ended up being surprisingly simple. I suppose Phineas was at least right about that. With clay and cobblestone in hand, I left the halls and the waking dreams behind me. I was generous when spacing out the torch blueprints for the library. After extending the path from the square to its would-be entrance, I got to work proper. The cobblestone I brought was running out quickly, but there was plenty more stored away in the mountain. Each time I travelled back and forth, I brought as much with me as I could carry. I was so focused on collecting more that when I travelled back to Mount Portley, I didn't suffer from the Endermen visions, but was so single-minded I also forgot to bring back coal to cook up the clay, a number of times. I caught Dana investigating the foundations as I hauled back the building materials. Night and day, I built, farmed and chopped trees, even beginning to enjoy fending off the hordes of phantoms, seeing how many times in a row I could sidestep their dive bombs before batting them away. Two Bone and I's chemistry in the field was ever improving, and I felt the surge of magic with each foe slain. With all the monsters felled, one dropped a magical leather helmet. One day, Dana came back to see the progress I'd made. This is massive. Do you think? I have a tendency to get carried away. Travellers might actually stay here if they see this. Well, when it has a roof anyway. I can't promise that, but when it does have a roof, you and Gloria can study to your heart's content. That's a point. Maybe you could build a tavern instead. It's hardly a party here as is. It'd be nice if someone living here was my own age. I told you about the Hoof and Udder, didn't I? You could be its first patron. You might get lucky and someone else is stupid enough to get lost on their way here. I suppose the people you met in Lushville are where they ought to be, though, being that stupid. What is old Carlton's problem with Lushville? I think they're really nice over there. Just shows you don't really know them. At that moment, I was reminded I didn't really know anyone. Even Nellie. She was the biggest enigma of all. I suppose Gloria knows quite a few people to be writing to them, inviting them here. That's not quite what happened. Gloria wrote the pamphlets, put them in envelopes, and addressed them to the farthest places she could find on the old maps. When we handed them out to wanderers, we told them they contained top secret information. For them to reach their distant destinations, the letters would have to change hands many times, until eventually they'd be handed to someone a little more curious and morally flexible. That sort of person may or may not want to move here, but others that find the discarded flyers might, wherever they ended up. Dana seemed quite proud as she explained Gloria's trick. So, anyone could turn up here. I suppose so. When Dana skipped away to show Gloria the paper I'd sold to her, made from the sugarcane I was cultivating on the lake, I paused and wondered how dangerous it really was to be helping Phineas hide away monsters in the mountain, so close to these people, and potentially many more, including those in Lushville. Moving forward, I'd have to be careful with the project.